Okay, welcome back then. Early March 1862, and yeah, it's been an interesting winter, and it's clear that obviously Austria has conducted a fairly large counter-offensive along multiple axes of advance. Really, the offensive has only kind of collided with our forces around Constanta, where it hit Hussein Ali Pasha's force. Now, we had him set to retreat in the event that he was engaged, but after 3 rounds of combat, so sort of defend and retreat, to assess on the ground, but only if he's really winning quite comfortably early on to pull back, and he did exactly that. It was still a fairly sizable action, resulting in heavy casualties and a national morale point lost, but we certainly inflict more casualties than the Austrians do, but because it's considered a defeat, he vacates the field. The key thing with this is if he was set to hold, could have been interesting. Could have been very interesting indeed, because this is really, this kind of corner is really the lion's share of the Austrian effort. From what we can see, most of the Austrian forces that are in the Balkans that are committed to this war now are for the most part concentrated in this region. And if we look at this battle, all of the supporting forces that could be brought to this engagement were like 250,000 men, 262,000 men. It shows how far we've come in terms of large battles, that feels rather anemic compared to what we have seen from Austrian forces. Interesting, really interesting. And when we look at the kind of Austrian forces that are deployed, looking at their numbers, getting a kind of an assessment for what they have, I don't know, I'm starting to think, is this the music of the future? Have we actually attritioned Austria down into something that is more manageable? It sort of feels like that, you know. But it's a fairly wide, you know, it's a broad offensive. It covers lots of different objectives. They're besieging now Plevna. In fact, they're not besieging Plevna, I lie. They passed through Plevna. They are besieging Augusta, Sofia, and they've also pushed a force south, I guess, through Belgrade, which they're besieging. South, again, towards Salonika. So they're looking to actually pursue lots of objectives this time at once. In a strange sort of way, whilst it makes the initial picture look alarming, this is interesting for us, really interesting, because we have force concentration. Our forces are actually in pretty good shape, save for Hussein Avni, whose forces did sustain significant casualties in that action, and he is set to avoid combat at all costs, to force march, and move to Adrianople forthwith with a view to entering the citadel, receiving replacements and such, which he needs to do. Omar Pasha, having engaged in some really successful action, sort of on his Todd really in the west. The last victory he scored was a significant one at Niš, but in the immediate aftermath of that victory, a very large Austrian force emerged. He set to fall back. He was in Skopje, and we decided to get him to force march an incredible distance, which he did successfully. We've now got him inside the town at Varna, where he is going to spend the next fortnight reorganizing his force, getting cohesion, getting some leave and that sort of thing, I suppose, for the soldiers, and getting his force back up to scratch, back into fighting shape. Now, Rita Pasha has long had one army corps subtracted. It's been in Adrianople receiving replacements. It's now received the replacements necessary for it to rejoin its command. So we're going to do just that. We're going to move north with this army corps, 7 days, and that will join Rita Pasha's force. We could use railway, but I'm thinking, is it a pointless use of railway points at this stage? Probably it is. So we're not going to do that. So that leaves Rita Pasha's force at full command, Abdi Pasha's force at full command, and Ahmed Pasha. Now, Ahmed and Abdul Karim Nadir have sort of switched places. Not quite sure why, but they have, and we'll settle for that. Abdul Karim Nadir, he's a pretty solid defensive commander, but he's also been at the centre of a few kind of pickles at times, so I don't mind sort of too much this change. It's okay if it switches back, whatever. They're both kind of about the same kind of quality, really, so that's okay. So what do we do from here? I think in the short term, even though the picture looks alarming, we do nothing. We allow events to take shape. We get force concentration centred around Rumelia, and we are going to be looking to conduct a counter-offensive, probably at first, to lift the siege at Sofia. We're well placed to hold Sofia. There's no chance of that falling, and frankly, there's no chance of Salonika falling, and these are the two big objectives. And we want to make sure that we position our forces, or we attack at the location that inflicts the most damage for the Austrians. Now, our war plan, since kind of summer last year, has been to kind of focus on national morale and undermining the regime in Vienna and creating the conditions whereby they might offer us a white peace or even peace with favourable conditions, or at the very least, with the national morale low enough, resulting in them peeling sufficient forces away that we can begin to look to actually prosecute a more offensive kind of war. Now, their national morale isn't low enough yet. It's at sort of 92%. The worrying thing with this sort of strategy is that it means that, you know, this might be behind what's caused them to focus on Serbia. They might well have a claim in Belgrade, like some sort of officially pressed claim which might be recognised. If that is the case and they take Belgrade, then that might assist their national morale. Furthermore, we have to start thinking about what other areas they might have claims on that they can take with small forces, minor states. I think Germany's going to be a different story. I don't think Prussia would necessarily countenance the idea of Austria throwing its weight around in southern Germany. And but there's, you know, the remainder of the Italian peninsula, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's getting interesting. I would say that one thing also is, I mean, just looking at the forces that the Austrians have, they're not insignificant forces, but for the first time, I'm getting a sense of light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, for the first time, I'm looking at an army that is manageable, an army that can actually be defeated in its own terms, that we can actually prosecute, you know. And again, this may not represent everything they have, but there are some kinds of indices. A lot of this game is about whether it's tactically, that is to say, trying to assess the status of an opponent's army, what its cohesion is. In some cases, you can get really good intelligence on that. In other cases, you really can't. So it's trying to assess the condition of enemy forces, and some of it is guesswork. You know, that is also the case for concealed Austrian forces. A lot of it's just trying to guess what the situation is for the Austrians. You know, there are some indices we can rely on though. One is national morale. It's the relative kind of legitimacy of the regime in Vienna, which is an easy read for any foreign power that has agents and spies on the ground. They can quickly get an assessment for that, and that's reflected in national morale. The other thing is in raw combat power. At this time, armies, they didn't necessarily conceal their strength very effectively, and sometimes it was even prestigious to sort of show that you have a very large, powerful standing army. And in the 19th century, lists of kind of, you know, who the great power was based on their armies were fairly sort of common. And we can see that Austrian combat power has atrophied fairly significantly, and it's remained at around 300 something. That means it's about 3 times, in terms of raw combat power, the size of our army. That sounds more alarming than it is, because that is raw combat power that is not subject, for example, to the effectiveness of commanders on the ground, and we already know that our commanders on the ground are absolutely zero-sum in terms of determining outcomes of actions, but also other kinds of things, you know, like combat penalties that the Austrians might suffer because of ineffective composition of forces, which has featured at times, not always, but at times. I mean, certainly at the beginning of the war, their force was large enough where, you know, quantity really was having a quality all of its own. That may not be the case now, and without that, the Austrians need proper force composition, and they need really effective command. They don't really have that. You know, in the last war we had with Austria, the big fear that we had, you know, was sort of Radetzky, who's got a famous defensive commander. He ended up not featuring very much, and he's kind of brown bread by now. And we haven't really experienced any particular Austrian commander that has led us to think, you know, okay, we have a problem here. Austrian commanders are sort of average to below average. That's what it feels like. So their raw combat power has slipped. When they went to war with us in late January 1860, their raw combat power gave them, at that moment, the largest army on earth, which it probably was, and that was on the basis of a big conscription program, and they were fielding a really, really sizable force. If there's one thing that we can take away from that, considering that Austria, you know, is a first-rate European power, which at that time had the largest army on earth, which has been ranged against us pretty much exclusively now, since late January 1860, if we can take something away from this, it is that we absolutely know how to have a row, and we have the resources to fight a first-rate European power. That's really encouraging, because frankly, I think if Austria was going to defeat us, I touch wood, I really hope not kind of, this doesn't now happen, you know, within 3 months they take Constantinople, but I think if Austria were really going to defeat us, really, really seriously, it's going to be the first year of the war, that's really when they had everything going for them. They had high national morale, which affected the combat effectiveness of their forces. Then their forces had really high organisation, or high morale, could cover cohesion and organisation very quickly. That's less the case. Their national morale is tanking. It's not nominal. It's like 8% below nominal, and their raw combat power now slips them into third place behind Russia and Britain. That's not including naval power, by the way. Britain, of course, has quite substantial combat power based on sprawling colonial forces. Its standing army in the metropole is probably quite small. So, yeah, really, really interesting. And that suggests that the experience that what we're seeing here isn't necessarily a distortion. It isn't necessarily the case that there are really, really massive Austrian forces out of view. And that's very encouraging indeed. It means, that we might be looking at a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, which you wouldn't think from looking at this map. Austria's just launched. The key thing about this offensive, if you consider all of the other offensives, the kind of seesawing character that this war has had, it's principally been us successfully defending, engaging the Austrians in a really big battle, inflicting staggering losses, like 80,000 in sort of casualties on them at different times, and then getting a bit too big for our boots, getting a bit too confident, on the back of that conducting offensives, whether it's kind of into Wallachia, Bucharest, or indeed into Zvornik, an attempt to move into Bosnia. Both of these offensives were foiled. They failed. We overstretched ourselves, and the seesaw effect was created by our forces dramatically breaking contact, suffering very heavy losses, and facing imminent defeat in the field. That's not been the case this time round. The majority of our forces, we were cautious this time. We held a defensive posture on the southern banks of the Danube. We could see that Hussein Avni was probably out on a limb a little bit here, so we set him to retreat if engaged. And his force was defeated. We suffer a national morale point. We'll take it on the chin. But his force has not been devastated. It has suffered heavy casualties, some elements, or some core of his force has. One of them requires an entirely new regiment. That's an artillery regiment, I think we lost in that battle. Double check that. Yeah, it was an artillery regiment. It looks like the early part of this battle was a hefty artillery duel. There was some really ferocious closing action. I'm wondering if ranged casualties here might reflect also the development of superior small arms with Austrian forces. That may well be the case. There's a very good chance that a lot of the kind of small arms that we were researching, breech-loaded rifles and this sort of thing, good chance the Austrians already have that. We have very traditional kind of musket-type forces that tend to do really, really well close quarters. There's a good chance the Austrians already have muzzle-loaded rifles. So they probably do have a ranged advantage, but sort of close up, that's where our forces can really kind of, their professionalism, their experience, and also the effectiveness of our commanders really, really kind of shows through. But it feels like we're on the verge of something here. That remains to be seen. We'll see if that actually comes to pass. First of all, Hussein Avni, he is set to move as fast as possible, evade combat. He's going to move back to Adrianople. And he's going to spend a fortnight to a month in Adrianople receiving replacements and so on and so forth. The third corps for Riza Pasha's force is moving north. We've got Avni Pasha also in Rumelia, and Omar Pasha having conducted a long forced march all the way from Skopje, having conducted absolutely stellar work in the west. I mean, 4 battles, 3 of them at Skopje, each one inflicting 25,000 casualties each, and then another one at Niš inflicting 50,000 casualties. First-rate stuff. And then at the end of that, we get him to force march the entire length of Bulgaria inside a fortnight in Rumelia, and he's now in Rumelia. He's going to spend, let's say, a fortnight in the town to kind of get his force back up to scratch. So for the next fortnight, we're going to hold our ground. We're going to sort of sit tight, play it cautiously. Ahmed Pasha is going to be okay in Varna because he does receive the support of 3 commands in Rumelia, and we've got most of our force in Rumelia. This gives the option to punch in different directions, maybe multiple directions at once, but we can look at Plevna, we can look at an offensive towards Sofia, if the siege continues at Sofia, or we could even continue to move a force south. My thinking is if they move a force to besiege Salonika, it's going to be limited. Might not. They might accumulate a lot of this western command around Salonika. That might open options for us. But it's about to get interesting. It's going to be an interesting spring and summer, I think. Possibly decisive in terms of the outcome of the war. And we need to start giving some thought, because this is the 3rd year of the war, what we do. If we do get the upper hand, and this time we clear the southern Balkans for good, and we can start looking at offensive options. We then have to consider, do we go for a white peace? You know, do we cut our losses? Do we take some sort of reparations from Austria? Or do we look at maybe spending an additional year or two, depending how tricky it is, conducting, again, a big invasion of the Austrian Empire? Bear in mind that before we caught them very flat-footed. They were maybe teeter-tottering between strategic commitments. There was Piedmont, Sardinia, also us. And at that time, they had an army that was like ours. They had a kind of standing professional army, really. This time they have a mass conscripted army, so they do have a greater preponderance of forces. As we push them back into their interior, that might really notice. That might really notice. They might have lots of forces in different directions. It might be difficult for us. In the last analysis, we can't hold a complete line of communication open all the way up to Vienna from any position. You know, I mean, Sarajevo is probably our best bet, because from Sarajevo we've got Bihać, Zagreb, Marburg, and then Vienna. Or even maybe through Slavonian, you know, we'd need kind of rear echelon forces. We probably need to hold a kind of command position in Hungary, with really the fringe holding Vienna but supported, and another fringe, if you like, or another exterior force holding kind of Slavonian, and then another force in Sava, ultimately. Could be really tricky, you know. But again, this is all sort of pipe dreams until we make it a reality on the ground. So that's what we need to focus on. The first thing is hold tight, allow the forces that need to recover. That's two commands, Hussein Avni and Omar Pasha. The other forces sit tight. We have got two activated commanders, so we have got options, but I think we don't do anything just yet. I don't think that there's an urgency to do anything just yet, actually. That's the thing. Okay, beyond that, we have our expeditionary force. It's set sail. In fact, it's running way behind schedule, but in 12 days' time, it is set to unload into Sinai. Luckily, we don't actually always need to unload in ports. These forces can unload directly into Sinai. And hopefully, Mehmed Ali Pasha will be activated in the next month or so. He has got some supply problems. Road network is completed in 6 weeks. That will hopefully resolve them, because he is adjacent to a depot in the last analysis. So there's no reason why he should. Worst case scenario, we can start sending these supply trains into Jerusalem, fill them up, and then send them back to the Sinai, ready for an offensive. Nothing else to report. One interesting development, which I'm not sure if I noted at the end of the last video, but that is that the Yemenis had actually taken Sana'a. Sana'a is back in our hands, which can only mean that there's actually been a loyalist revolt. Maybe concrete sort of gains on the ground on the basis of protectorate status. Really interesting. They've moved the larger part of their force back to Hadramaut. It may be that as they move their force back, these territories naturally revert back to our control if they don't have substantial forces there. That may be what's happened here. And then they've moved in another regular force, probably designed to enter the town. But anyway, Sana'a is back in our hands. Zarif Mustafa Pasha's force, Yemeni force, having been driven north after a surprise defeat outside Sana'a, is now combined with the cavalry division. It means he's got a little bit of combined arms. It means he's got some reconnaissance. That might have been what failed him before. He really had, he's in command of basically a marine division. That's okay, but it's limited in terms of what it can do. They're excellent soldiers. They're very experienced by now, I would have thought. Reasonably experienced anyway. But yeah, a cavalry division I think will be a game changer. Once he's activated, he moves back into Sana'a. The only other development, of course, as noted, is that our attempt to stake a claim on Sumatra, which is to say to contest the Dutch attempt to transition this region into a protectorate, failed. Nothing came off. It didn't get any traction in the international community. We're doling out some more money. We're sending more diplomats. We're pushing for this one. And each time it's a 50-50 chance. And the way to see it is all of the resources we have in here. It's kind of like, I don't really gamble with cards. I don't get it. But the idea is you kind of put more money in a stash, and that's also what we're doing by doling out money to contest them. It's kind of putting a lot of money into the stash. Winner takes all. There's no conciliatory prize really, and the prize in this case is Sumatra. It would be an excellent colonial gain for us. It's not really something the Ottomans pursued. It's not something they have, the ruling class has any desire, but we obviously do take the ruling class's aims and objectives as our priority, which is to say the things that the Ottoman Empire has claims on, the things that we get prestige for. We get prestige for the, that's the wrong map, Ministry of Colonial Affairs. We get prestige for some of these regions precisely because they are publicly declared aims, which is to say if we fail to get them, or if they're taken by someone else, that becomes problematic. We can see a bit of a problem here. So Britain is the second contesting power in Qatar and Bahrain, and they've got a 40% average colonial penetration. We're sitting at 44. That said, this region is a protectorate, so I don't see that they can do anything, frankly, other than to try and atrophy our power. I may have also been wrong on reflection about the idea that missions. I'm not too sure yet. The idea that missions might function as a kind of conduit for chief bribing, because as I look at this more, it doesn't actually stipulate that you need a mission. Further to that, it's based on whether you can play or not. It has to have 5 to 35 colonial penetration. I think the reason we can't play this is because the colonial penetration is too high. We're kind of beyond the days. We've moved beyond the days of bribing colonial chiefs. That's the problem for us, really. Whereas British colonial penetration is sitting at 28%. So they can play these kind of cards. They can do this kind of, I mean, it's already a protectorate. So the annoying thing is all they're really doing is costing us time, resources, really. The only way they can get Kuwait, Qatar, Dubai, Bahrain is through military conquest now, which is not beyond the capacity of the British. Absolutely not. I don't think that would be. I don't think that they would. Their hands are tied up elsewhere. They've got other. They've not fully colonized the subcontinent in India, and they've got their fingers in a lot of pies, and they've got fairly good relations with the British. But late game, many years from now, we don't know what's going to happen. The key thing to remember with the Middle East is that in game terms, the Middle East is kind of depicted as lots of colonial territories. They are depicted as kind of colonies of the Ottoman Empire. Like Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria, excuse me, are depicted as Turkish colonies. That's not really the case for the Ottomans. The Ottomans, they don't make any distinction between Baghdad and Salonika, frankly. The Ottomans don't see themselves as having a polity that is predicated on something, some ethnic homogeneity. Even though kind of modern-day Turks, I suppose, view, the Republic of Turkey or the Turkish Republic as kind of a successor state, which with some reason you can say that is the case. The reality is the Ottomans did not see themselves as belonging to any kind of ethnic group or anything like this, for good reason. But anyway, I won't ramble on about Ottoman history. So anyway, these regions are viewed at the very least by European colonial powers as colonial provinces. In that sense, that's kind of more important than how we view it, frankly. If they view Iraq and Syria as colonial provinces and they have some interest in those regions, then we need to take note of that. That's one of the things that is obviously behind us, looking now to connect up our kind of metropole, if you like, which I suppose you could say our metropole is really kind of Western Anatolia and kind of northern Greece, Bulgaria. This is kind of our metropole, really. So we're looking to connect this up now with our hinterland, the interior, as we're going to see it, the Middle East. To that end, we are in a position. We have private capital, the manufactured goods, and the steel to begin the construction of another stretch of railroad. And this stretch of railroad is going to be going to Beirut. I'm not sure we can do that. That leaves us with too little. Yeah. What has just happened? Right, not this turn then. We'll hold off for that. It requires more steel than I would have imagined. Well, it averages out, it should be 27 units of steel. Now, whatever the cost that's given here below, so 675 capital, 27 steel, 27 manufactured goods, that's pretty much optimal costs. So in completely flat terrain, in perfect weather, that's how much it would cost you. Once you start looking at different terrain, and also weather does seem to impact it, actually, then the costs go up. So it actually requires a lot more steel. Maybe more steel for tunnels and things like this, I don't know. But anyway, we can't do that just yet. That's a shame. We'll check that when we go to our kind of economy, because we can start addressing, maybe looking at even importing some steel. We do produce more than enough steel now. We make about 8-9 units of steel per turn, but maybe that's not fast enough. So we might import maybe 50 units of steel. So we've got a nice big kind of stockpile that we can start eating into. That's pretty much it then. So we're contesting Sumatra. We're sitting tight in the Balkan Peninsula. And we've got the remainder of the Egyptian task force en route to Sinai. It should be unloaded, frankly, by sort of this time. Well, by late March. Okay? By 2 weeks' time. What condition it's in, I don't know. Whether it'll be in a condition to move straight away. Hopefully it will be. That would be ideal. But it may not be. We may have to wait till April or even May. Of course, a lot of this depends on whether Mehmed Ali is activated, what his supply situation is and such. But the foundation now is for the most part laid for an offensive into Egypt. The other thing that I should mention is we are sending our main fleet to sit off of Cyrenaica. The reason being is the anchorage that we have, which I suppose is kind of the embryo of Tobruk Harbour, is blockaded. Has been for some time. So, yeah, that's a bit of a concern. And that's actually, it means that larger forces, such as division-sized forces, they're struggling. Yeah, they're struggling in Cyrenaica. We can't draw supplies all the way from Tripoli this far. You know, we're kind of having the same sort of problem that Rommel had, you know, just under a century later. And the infrastructure, I would suggest, is far less developed in Libya now than it was then. So anyway, I think that's it. So, I mean, we've already gone through the reports at the end of the last video. We'll flick through the rest of the reports. We've seen the combat reports already, just to see kind of what else is going on. We'll have a look at some international stuff as well, see what's happening in the American Civil War. Yeah, it's going badly for the Confederacy. This might, you know, this is of interest to us for a number of reasons. First of all, we've got prestige points. This is the kind of pecking order, really, of the great powers. We've been ranked at number 5 for some time now. Austria is ranked at number 6. Austria's prestige is just under 7,000. They've recovered quite a lot of prestige, it should be said, in the last few years, but not enough. Not enough to kind of be in the same position as us. We're ranked as the 5th greatest power on Earth. That's really good. This is not like an abstract thing that you just get from colonies or battles. You actually get prestige also from factories. It is also a reflection of your industrial might. You'd be really hard-pressed to have a kind of breadbasket economy and very high prestige. We get prestige from all kinds of things, structures, productions, and also, you know, it fluctuates from turn to turn based on things that we gain and lose and this sort of thing, objectives that are under our control. So prestige is quite dynamic. It's drawn from lots of different areas. And we accumulate prestige, of course, through successes, big successes in battles. So we're ranked at number 5. Austria's below us. Now, the United States, at one point, was challenging Britain for the top spot. I mean, there's quite a big drop-off, but there was a bit of a diplomatic incident between the USA and Britain over Hawaii. Britain surprisingly decided to try and press the claim and was anxious. Whenever you get to this part of the Pacific, you see where the map here cuts off. Whenever you transition, I think this game was made by flat earthers. Whenever you kind of transition too fast, it can cause a crash, a weird crash. I noticed this. Anyway, Britain decided to kind of try and get into a bit of a tussle with the Americans. It wasn't, you know, they didn't come to blows. It was quite interesting, though. It would have been really interesting if the Anglosphere kind of ignited at this stage. But anyway, the net result is that Britain was humiliated publicly. They had to back down. They didn't fancy, you know, a big fight with the Americans on the Canadian border. So for a while, the United States was doing quite well. I would probably say that since then, I think that was in 54 or 55, probably their, you know, the prestige has begun to reflect a little bit more. You know, it was a short-term gain for the Americans. Britain is still very much in the lead. It has been since 1850, but we can see that it's not the mad, crazy lead that they had in 1850. You can see that Britain's decline begins as a relative decline, which is to say its economy continues to grow. You know, it still expands its empire, but countries like France are now beginning to catch up. So Britain's at 23,000, France is at 14,000. France takes the number 2 spot. Number 3 spot is at Russia at 13,000. That's not that far off where we are. That's the key thing. There was a big drop-off between where we were, number 5 spot, and number 4. That is not the case now. Number 4 spot is occupied now by the United States. So, yeah, they're basically the next most prestigious power. They are listed as the next great power above us. They're at 12,700. So, yeah, it's interesting. Austria is obviously looking, you know, part of probably what's behind this war is Austria very much looking to regain its position as a leading European power. Prussia, in a funny sort of way, is still, I mean, it's number 8, is still kind of a marginal power. But you got to remember that there's between number 8, Prussia's got 6,531, and for example, number 6, which is Austria's position, Austria only has a couple of hundred more. So below us, the ranks are quite tight, I think. It's probably between Russia, no, it's not Russia, sorry, Prussia, Austria, probably China's in there as well. And China's now prestige will continue to kind of atrophy because China is precisely a prestigious, large polity, but with a completely decaying institutions and a breadbasket economy. Japan at the moment is ranked as 10, but bear in mind Japan has 5,000 prestige. So yeah, there's a lot to play for in terms of the kind of middle ranking or the lower ranking great powers. These powers can very quickly eclipse or bypass each other. We're fairly comfortable. I'd say that from 4th to 5th, we've got a fairly comfortable lead over Austria. Unless something really big happens, disastrous happens, we're in a comfortable spot. And if we carry on doing what we're doing, we could be in a position to challenge the United States as the 4th great power. You know, obviously the United States is in a different theatre to us. It's not going to result in now coming to blows or anything, but that would be really interesting. It would be hard to do because we've got to keep in mind as well that the United States position, I will pass in a moment, the United States position is a little bit kind of subject to the fact that it's in the middle of a civil war. So the United States position might dramatically rebound after the civil war, which looks like the federal government is comfortably in control there. So that's it pretty much. In terms of other reports, let's check our economy really quickly. Exports look fairly strong there. Yeah, another really good round. 153 units on the national market sold for 563. Again, well into the 500s. You don't see a kind of really gradualistic growth in the economy. One of the things you notice in this is that it happens in fits and bursts. It's kind of quantity into quality. You get these periods where you're thinking, I don't get it, I'm building all these factories, these railroads. Why isn't anything really reflecting itself? And then all of a sudden you'll get a burst or a spurt 2-3 years later, and as your economy kind of begins to kind of come to life. And that's really happened for us really since 1857, 1858. It really feels like we're in the game as a serious, you know, like credible industrial power since 1857, 1858. That's what it sort of feels like. Exports 80 units for 260, imports 30 units for 70. So yeah, decent round economically. Let's set our kind of imports then, or exports I should say. Tobacco's back up, that's good. One thing you should keep in mind with this as well is the greater amount of availability of goods that you have on your domestic market. So for example, we've got 18 units, okay? If I export 8 of those units now, what will happen is the amount that's sold in the domestic market will reduce slightly. The reason being is because the less commodities you have, I suppose, slightly more expensive they are on the domestic market. Now there is a ceiling to this, I found. The ceiling is around 10 to 20 units of goods. Once you got around sort of 15, so one thing we might look at doing to the textiles is actually holding some back. In fact, you know what? Let's do that right now. So, for example, I mean, if we look at luxury goods at the moment, luxury goods sit at. So we're selling 12 units. No, sorry, we're producing 12 units. We're selling 11 units on the national market. Okay. Let's watch that figure. That figure will climb to 12. In fact, you will notice in the last video that we were shifting 12 units of goods. Now, that's despite the fact that we have a stockpile of 18. Okay? The reason for that is, is if you have a little bit of a stockpile on the domestic market, it makes it a bit more available. It doesn't drive the price down here. This represents its export value. But once something becomes more available in the domestic market, you tend to shift a little bit more. So there is always an advantage to holding back a certain sort of proportion of most commodities that actually sell, you know. So for example, again, we'll look at this concretely. So our national market sales now for textiles are 8 units of goods, okay? We're going to export 7. This time around, we're going to hold back 15, which means that hopefully in the next couple of turns, the 8 units of goods that we're selling on the national market will increase, maybe only by 1 or 2 values. I really hope that's the case. It may not be the case. If it isn't, we'll try and hold back some more. We'll see if we can hold back some more. I mean, actually, looking at this, textiles belongs to common groups. Population can buy at most 66 wares in this group. You're currently selling them 65. So we could probably only shift one more kind of units of textiles at most. We'll see if holding back and keeping at 15 does that. But for the most part, if you keep your goods, your available goods in the domestic market, to always between 10 to 20. Some of them 10, some 15, you know. It'll drive up domestic consumption a little bit. And you'll always make more money shifting commodities at home than exporting. When you export goods, you export a wholesale price to another capitalist that then sells those on the domestic market in that country. So if you're selling 5 units of tobacco to France, you're not selling them directly in French shops or anything like that. You're selling them to a distributor in France, you know. So it means that really you're shifting at a wholesale price. This price is like a wholesale price. When you sell goods on the domestic market, your capitalist, if you like, your industrialists, the people that represent this of private wealth, they are at every chain. They're every section of the chain. You know, they're at the point of from production to transit, manufacture, distribution, everything. You know, like you know, from, if you like, the kind of the vine to the glass. You know, Ottoman capitalists will make money every inch of the way. So you will always make more money per unit of good selling on the domestic market. That's something you should always keep in mind. You'll never make more money exporting. Exporting is what you do with your surplus. You can end up making more money in total exporting than you do selling. If you become a big export power, than you do selling on the domestic market. The reason for that is because you have such a huge surplus of commodities. You're such a big industrial power, and your domestic consumption is limited by your population, the available wealth that exists in your domestic market, that you can end up ultimately making more. But you always want to try and sell first at home, make more money that way. Anyway, that's 4 hours into the video and I've not passed turn. So yeah, let's continue setting our exports. Okay, I think that's good. We're going to keep cattle, I think, off the export market for the time being. See if we can build a stockpile of that. Yeah, so the one thing that we do want to address is steel then. Let's have a look at our assets balance. Good. So next term we'll have 67 units. That's importing 5. Push that up. We're going to import 10 units altogether. And if we look at what's requested and what's available in both those locations, in fact 15 units, we're getting 5 from North Germany. They've got 432 sold, 5 requested. Yeah, so there's ample steel on the international markets at the moment. That's really good. We should have no problems with that. That'll leave us with 77 next term. That means that we'll probably be able to spend and still have 20 odd units left over. And next term, stock will sit at 16 for textiles. Textiles is going to be the way forward for us, I think, for really good money. It's really irritating in countries like, you know, I mean, Parana. I mean, what is that? Brazil. I mean, you know. I get a feeling there might be something. There's not something that's produced domestically in any kind of great quantity, unless they have really big crafts production or something like that. Or maybe it's just that they you know, they've accumulated a huge amount. Maybe they imported a lot or something like this, and now they're just unloading onto the world market. It doesn't look like it's something that's produced domestically, not in any kind of organised fashion. A bit of raw materials that Brazil has access to, though. They're absolutely wonderful basis for a really serious economy there. We're not going to invade Brazil, don't worry. just looking. Just window shopping. Right. So assets balance. So yeah, steel's good. That's the only thing I wanted to really have a look at. Timber is increasing by 2 units per ton. We have to import 10 units of timber. We're going to be stuck in the kind of woods. See what I did there? As a kind of, I think as a kind of permanent timber importer, really. We just don't have access to the kind of commercial forestry that we need. Let's change that. I mean, it's basically Janina or Iparos. That could change. I mean, it sounds strange to have something like timber prospected, but it's absolutely not at all. I mean, to have a kind of an industrialist prospect an area that's suitable for large-scale commercial forestry is something that's dreadfully normal and ordinary. So it's something that might well happen at some point, and would be a welcome development if it did. I mean, we basically have one region with any kind of commercial forestry, and that's in Epirus in Greece. So yeah, not terribly desirable, right? So that's our economy inspected. Let's have a quick look through everything else then. So yeah, Austria's at war with Serbia now. Yeah, we'll see Casus Belli. Yeah, well, they've had that long term, but they've not acted upon it, so we're not going to hold out hope for the Italians to do anything. I get a feeling they might have lost a large part of their army during the kind of... They mucked up, really. They declared war. I mean, they were on the winning side of a war. They could have sat tight. They had Milan. I think they're doling out a huge amount of money to the Austrians. Keep in mind, that might be where a lot of Austrian wealth, because at times I've been thinking, where's the Austrian money coming from? It's not coming from tariffs and excise taxes, because their industrial economy's been gutted. Okay, their census tax will still collect a reasonable amount. They've got probably a fairly urbanized population and an efficient bureaucracy, but plus they control the Italian peninsula. Plus, who knows, maybe Piedmont, Sardinia doling out a significant portion of its kind of annual revenue. Now, so on the colonial front, then, the only thing to look out for is Sumatra next turn. We've already laid the stake, so that's it. I'm going to put you on pause for an early March. We'll pass turn, and we'll see you on the other side in late March. Okay, welcome back then. So we're in late March, and yeah, it's interesting looking at the Balkans. The Austrian offensive has really taken shape. I tell you what, they're going hell there with everything they got this time. But from what I can see, this must be like the overwhelming majority of the field army. They had a large damaged force in Moldavia, which they have transit rights. I think they've brought that force mostly into kind of Bucharest now to receive replacements. So they've got a large reserve, and they've moved pretty much a full standing army, and that's going to be 100 to 200,000 men in Constanta, maybe slightly less. Fairly sizable force, 3 corps, sitting outside Plevna, besieging Plevna. Fairly damaged Austrian corps, nevertheless unopposed and fairly secure in the rear, besieging Augusta. They're conducting a siege of Sofia with a relatively small Austrian force, so there's evidence that they are bringing in sort of support for the Sofia siege, and they're conducting a siege of Salonika, so they are going ham. They want it this time. They also took Belgrade. Bad news for us, and it's exactly what I feared. Yeah, their national morale is back up to 100 now. It's nominal. We're going to have to begin to start making some moves. We've got a lot of force concentration, a lot of forces kind of bunched up like a coiled spring, and we're going to have to consider where to unleash this force now, and, to do what with whom. So beyond the kind of Balkans, there's that. Navy sat outside Tobruk, but it's not detected anything, and the problem is its organisation's really low now, so we can actually have to bring these guys back to Constantinople. I think once that's done, we'll move them right back there, frankly. So we're going to set to evade combat and get these boys back into Constantinople. 14 days. Also looking at the combat reports, since we're on maritime affairs, we can see some exchange of fire in the trade box. So the Austrians still have a raiding force inside the trade box, and yeah, we're exchanging fire, but the escorts are doing their job. They're kind of taking the hits, they're protecting the merchant ships. However, it is now time to detach the merchant fleet. They're on their own for the time being. We are going to have to bring the merchants, not the merchants, the kind of, if you like, our raiding fleet, Osman Pasha's fleet. I've got a bit of a maritime plan. God, those sound effects are loud. I've got a bit of a plan for the Navy, actually. What we're going to do, we're going to get both of these forces recovered, get replacements, cohesion. And because we're not really conducting commerce raiding in the Mediterranean, there aren't any Austrian. There's no Austrian commerce in the Mediterranean. They've basically closed it off, and they're looking to really raid our commerce. Our commerce is more important for them a little bit, because we obviously use our merchant fleet in the Mediterranean to supply parts of our empire. So we do need to maintain a presence in order to, for example, supply any forces at all in Libya. What we're going to do is to ensure that at any one time we have forces, because we are more of a serious maritime power than Austria. we're going to split our fleet into two. We've got two commanders instead of having a small escort force. And at any one time, we will have half of the fleet out conducting operations in the Mediterranean, whilst the other half receive replacements, gets rest, organisation. Then they'll just switch. It means that we'll have a permanent presence. We don't have a situation like this where for a fortnight or more, we're going to have no ships at all. So, you know, it depends what's happening. We'll probably have forces either in the maritime trade box, half our entire surface fleet conducting escort for the merchants in the trade box will have a big effect, I think. And if we look at wild patrolling, number 2 fleet inflicts 9 hits, takes 9 return. Second time round, it lands 4 hits, takes 8 in return. So our kind of escorts are doing their job, actually. They're hitting the Austrian raiders. We can't see any Austrian raiders in there. That might be due to low detection or something like this. In fact, I'll tell you what it is. It's Egypt. What an idiot I am. The Egyptians, they must have pretty much their entire surface fleet there. It's interesting to know. Okay, so the Egyptians have raiders also. Because I couldn't see any Austrian ones. I thought maybe it's due to detection. But no, I think it's... Let's have a look. Also here, it's difficult because, of course, it's just going to be in German, isn't it? Which means that I could confuse it with... I can't see any evidence, actually. It's Brazil, Corvette, probably Dutch. Yeah, there's different forces there. No, there's 5 Ausfang group. I think there is still an Austrian force there, actually. We just can't kind of see it. But there is evidence that they are, in actual fact. They're also noted as being present, as well as Egyptians. So I think that's going to necessitate pretty much a permanent kind of naval force inside the trade box to counter this raiding, to keep the lines open, and possibly at times also conduct some kind of sortie out around Tobruk. I don't know if Tobruk is blockaded. I don't really know what governs blockading ports. Whether it's blockaded by a force sitting outside the port, whether this is like an offshoot from the fact that a proportion of our trade is choked off, or a proportion of our kind of merchant activity, it's limited by the mere presence of raiders. I don't know. You thought I'd know that, wouldn't you? But no, I guess you don't. So anyway, yeah, well behind schedule still. Okay, 2 days, apparently. That said, I mean, the transport's there. I suppose it takes time. I think it takes a lot less time if you have a port. Put it that way. I think it's the fact that they're kind of making an improvised landing using small sailing boats and such. But anyway, 2 days away. In the Yemen, then, Zaif Mustafa, he's activated. He does need to move south to get access to supplies. There's a depot in Sana'a. It's being besieged. He is now going to conduct an offensive. He should have the force to do it. 9 days march. Weather's reasonably clement. He's actually leaving in the rain in Abba. That's quite a surprise, but maybe it shouldn't be. But yeah, nevertheless, 9 days march is fine, and he should be in shape to easily deal with a besieging force. And then we're going to look to try and see if we can conduct more of a serious campaign in Yemen. That is pretty much it. Yeah, that's it. So the only other thing is we've imported some steel, specifically to sort of. So we've got construction now, a continuous line construction from Ankara, which is there's obviously already a line in Ankara, looking to turn Ankara into a kind of junction city. Really, we've got a continuous line going all the way down to kind of Latakia, Antioch sort of area. We're going to push this further south now. We're in a position to. That's good. That leaves us with sufficient steel. So that pushes the line down. It's going to take, it's going to be about a year really before this line begins to actually kind of this construction begins to yield results. But we're pretty much connecting up now. Beirut next stretch will go into Damascus. There's actually snow in Damascus. Can you believe it? And then I suppose ultimately down to Jerusalem, and then we'll begin to look next year in '63. Again, we're going to focus most of our kind of private capital on this. So we're going to import some more steel. We're going to press a line south towards, Baghdad. We're going to connect Baghdad up with the main line. And then we're going to do a shortcut line from Mosul through northern Syria to Aleppo. Yeah, and at some point we'll also conduct maybe a kind of some sort of remote line through the desert in Mesopotamia at some point. But that's some time off, I think. Right. Our military moves in the Balkan Peninsula, then. Now, what do we have at our disposal? 3 commands. Ahmed Pasha, or Abdulkarim Nadir, who's now taking command again. I don't know what's going on here. So when I release him from command, it does actually go to Ahmed Pasha. Right, fine. So we've got 1 army in Varna. That receives support from 3 armies. We can now get Omar Pasha out of Rumelia. His army is for the most part recovered. Now all of these forces are supplied. The only force that is not activated is Rita Pasha. That's fine. We would have always intended to keep 1 force back in Rumelia. We can kind of use Rita Pasha's relative ineffectiveness to our advantage now, which is to say use him as a kind of base, if you like, you know, where he can support other forces. Now the problem is here, there's a possibility that the Austrians will conduct an offensive through Rumelia. They don't appear to have a commander in Plevna. With Rita Pasha supporting, that should be enough. We're going to keep Ahmed Pasha in Varna for the time being. We'll keep options open to move to Plevna at some point. And we are going to move to lift the siege at Sofia. That's the most pressing concern for the time being. Second most important, of course, is going to be Salonika. If Hussein Avni's force gets replacements kind of quick enough, what have we got here? So we've got some Romanians being constructed. If he can get replacements and get his organisation back up to scratch in a decent enough time, we can actually use Hussein Avni to lift the siege, to conduct an independent offensive, if you like, at Salonika. And he has forces enough to do that. It depends how much the Austrians push down this route. Depends on that, I think. What have they got in? They have a corps of Italians in Skopje. That's interesting. Right, Omar Pasha, you're activated. Set to offensive. We're going to set to a really big offensive, and it's going to be a 9-day march. You're going to be supported by Abdi Pasha. Set to offensive. And also 9 days. That's good. Both of those commands are supported by Rita Pasha. Rita Pasha, in turn, provides support to Ahmed Pasha. That's okay for now. That should be fine. They both get there in 9 days. Weather is not good. We are marching in the snow, but I don't want to leave it for a really long time. Let's get the Austrians before they've effectively concentrated forces. In some senses, I kind of want them to concentrate forces. I kind of want to defeat them in a really big pitched battles with all of my forces. You know, the problem is with a counterattack is that means our forces are then strung out. So we need to kind of keep on the move a little bit in a strange sort of way. Anyway, lifting the siege. Part of me thinks there's no real danger to Sofia. That's the only thing. The only issue with Sofia is supplies. Because we've got a large garrison in Sofia, it means that it's going to eat through supplies pretty quickly. I mean, Sofia is the most pressing thing. How long would it take to get there? 10 days. Now let's focus on Sofia for the time being. We can actually move these forces back. We're really looking to lift the siege, defeat them, engage them in the field. And there's options open then for Agosta, Plevna. We can kind of wheel back round. But the idea is we use this Rumelia as a base of operations. We conduct kind of judicious offensives into areas to relieve pressure from, you know, kind of besieged garrisons and such. And to, you know, hit the Austrians kind of, whilst they're divided, whilst they're strung out. They've got different commands in different positions. They've got commanders up here, but these are not really substantial forces. What intel have we got on Montenegro? So a light cavalry division plus a corps. It's like a corps plus artillery and supplies. Light cavalry division, interesting. Yeah, this time we go for Sofia. 2 commands should do the job. Yeah, and Rita Pasha provides support. That's pretty much it. That's all we're going to do. We just want to lift the pressure off. We want to get our lines of communication. We want to get supplies into Sofia. And, yeah, that's pretty much it, I think. We kind of concentrate on one force at a time. just engage and defeat each force one at a time. Kind of roll them down like sort of 10 pins. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's have a quick look at Sumatra. So we've pressed the claim. It's in transit. It's it's 50%. The decision has a duration of 2 turns and triggers its effects the first turn of its use. So the first turn it hasn't done anything. They're still declaring protectorate. There's no crisis. We might have to play it again. It's 50-50 each time, pretty much. It's a 50% chance. And after this, we pretty much one more chance. We're down to our last diplomat. We didn't spend them. We had 3 diplomats, and that should be ample. That would be a real shame if it's just ignored. If we expend, 75 each time, so it's going to be like nearly 200 state revenue, and 3 diplomats to have the international community basically ignore it. I mean, it's probably believable for the Ottoman Empire. Even a revitalized one in the 1860s, they would just ignore it. They'll think, yeah, we're going to side with the Dutch by doing nothing. That would probably give us a casus belli, incidentally, against the Dutch, which would be interesting. It would give us the only legitimate casus belli that we have. Greece has got one on us, Russia's got one on us, Piemont's got one on us because of roads. And we would have one on the Dutch. Might even be a permanent one because we have commercial interest here. A commercial interest inside a Dutch protectorate. We'll see what happens. But I would like the stake to work, basically. That's really, what we're kind of paying for. But anyway, alright, so that's combat reports. Let's have a look through our other reports. So the Mediterranean transport points is at 180. It should be more, much more, because we have a significant, merchant marine there. That does suggest that the presence of raiders in the maritime trade box is kind of choking off a little bit of our supply capacity. It may even be worth a consideration to just build another merchant fleet and send that there. Let's quickly check the War Ministry. We have ample parts for merchant ships for the time being, anyway. Alright, so 156 units of goods sold in the national market for 592. I can't think whether that's a record. Have we actually broken the 600 kind of ceiling yet? If we haven't, that would be a record. I think the record might have been 580. So the economy is doing really well. That's keep in mind, despite the chaos in the Balkans. I mean, this is, on the surface, should be disruptive to our economy. This probably suggests that this region doesn't account for a lot of domestic consumption. That this kind of breadbasket, that it's probably quite a poor rural part of the empire, and that the wealth really is focused around these, the big industrial cities, Constantinople, Smyrna, and the emerging giants, really, Sinop, Ankara. I think that's the impression I sort of rather get. We'll see. That said, Salonika is no small city. I mean, neither is Sofia, actually. But despite the fact that they're choked off from any kind of supplies or anything, the economy's doing well. Alright, so yeah, the economy looks good. Let's set our exports. Luxury goods. Let's check on domestic consumption. Certain things. So textiles, national market sales 10. Colonial market sales 3. What was it last time? 8? And so it's increased by having a greater preponderance of a commodity on the domestic market. Again, there is a ceiling to that. If you've got 100 textiles, it doesn't mean you're going to shift like 70 of them. It's, the ceiling. You can actually see kind of where your demand is. I don't tend to use this feature very much, but you can kind of track it subject to class. you can get an idea of what the demand is, what you can kind of sell. This is a little bit mechanical. This does change anyway. I think this is probably better more for kind of just reflecting on the status of the economy. It's more of like an after report. I probably wouldn't chase this. I would kind of, I would sort of, I would sort of assess it. The real data really is contained here in your sort of industry and commerce kind of ministry, because you actually get the readings. You actually get what you're selling. So expanses for me, building 40 units, okay. Alright, with that in mind then, let's try and keep sort of, let's try and push, we'll keep 15 units of tobacco on the domestic market. So we're trying to sort of stockpile slightly more goods in the domestic market with a view of driving up domestic sales, just by making the products slightly more available, driving up the price. You could also manipulate this a little bit by artificially choking off availability of certain kinds of goods. I think I've showed this in an earlier video, but you can see at the bottom of the pop-up here, 80% of this type of good is assigned to your national market. You can manipulate that by right-clicking 75. You can choke it off. I typically, commodities that are produced that I have domestic access to, I mean, I'll track it. It's obviously subject to whether or not the resource is exploited. I will always have it set to 80 for the most part, unless it's a strategic resource early on. So if you remember in the early 1850s, I had manufacturing goods set to about 50%, something like that. It's 80% now because we've got a decent manufacturing base. We produce a surplus of manufactured goods. We produce more than we can sell on the domestic market. Substantially more, actually. We produce, I mean, from structures, 38 minus 9, so that's 29. Because structures expenses is 9. And we sell on the domestic market like 5 units, plus 2 on the colonial markets. Plus 2 colonial expenses, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's, what does that mean? You're getting, I don't know, 20 units, I guess, per turn, which is good. But that's what we've got set for sales, incidentally. We don't always sell 20 units, but anyway. So yeah, the best way to track it is here. You can choke off and make things more available, depending if you want to stockpile something for a strategic reason. You want to invest it into some kind of plant or something like this. Now we'll keep it at 4 actually, dyes, because we've got a bit of an issue with dyes, haven't we? But as I say, the ceiling for driving up demand domestically probably varies a little bit from commodity to commodity, but there's a rule of thumb, 15 to 20 seems to be the kind of the sweet spot. At that point, it doesn't really have any effect on kind of availability, price availability. Did we successfully import preserved food? No, in fact, we intentionally stopped importing preserved food. Right, that's export set. So we've still got steel set to 15. We'll leave that for a while, actually. Even though we're producing, a decent amount of steel, we're basically not producing enough for the really ambitious. If you consider the amount of steel that's required for constructing a rail line from Ankara all the way down to Beirut, that's the amount of steel we've put out, basically, in the last, few months. So we are low on steel. So importing it to supplement our production is good enough. One really notable thing, and that is that the state is flush just now, really flush, and that's good to see. We've also got officers, good manpower, so we're sort of just building up our reserves a little bit at the moment. At some point, we are going to look to begin the construction of a new army, I think. But I want to see what we can do with what we have for the moment. Okay, assets balance, good. Nothing else to kind of look at there, really. Let's look at other reports. So we'll see what's happened next turn. The hope is, that their protectorate, they're halfway there, that their protectorate will be lifted. That's still balanced positive for us. I mean, even in terms of the economic damage it does and the amount it's cost their state is a lot. The Dutch state is, it's not going to have a lot of state revenue. It's just whether or not, our state can get any kind of traction, really, to compel them to lift. Be a real shame if it doesn't. It'd be very unlucky, given it's a 50% chance, I think, each time. Well, it says 50% chance to trigger a crisis against the owner of the region. Now, when I've played these before in other games, I've never had a crisis. What does happen is it results sometimes after a couple of attempts on your opponent simply removing the declared protectorate status. It just vanishes. So maybe that means that there's no real crisis, or that is how the crisis is expressed. I don't know. In the years that I played this, having an actual crisis where you play a card game, it's only ever happened a couple of times. Didn't even know what I was doing. It's not in the rules. There's no manual. There's nothing online either. There's no tutorials for how to do. I mean, you have to just figure it out. But it's not something that's common enough that you can learn how to do it well. That's the frustrating part, really, of kind of diplomatic crises. It'd be so annoying if the Dutch secure that as a protectorate. We could intervene later, but it's a long way off. I mean, we could militarily intervene and look at that as a long-term project. But it would require good rail access to the Middle East. It would require significant port and a military presence in the Persian Gulf, or indeed in Yemen. It would require the Arabian Peninsula really to be, to a large extent, consolidated for us to be able to project meaningful military power into the Dutch East Indies. We wouldn't probably need very much, but in a weird sort of way, it might even be easier to control the Dutch East Indies when it's properly, fully controlled by the Dutch as a colony than if it's controlled by these kind of sultans, which can muster a force of maybe a reasonable number of men. I don't know. Yeah, it's a consideration for the future, though. But anyway, let's hope the stake comes off. That's pretty much it. That's all of our moves. We've got the Navy, the fleet, in both of its incarnations, really, as both an escort force and the main surface combat group. They're both moving back to port, and we are conducting an offensive into Sofia. We're importing steel, and we are unloading into Sinai, and we're continuing to press our claim in Sumatra. That's pretty much it. Exports are set. Late March, we're going to pass the turn. We'll see you in on the other side in early April. Okay, welcome back, early April then, and yeah, an interesting turn. We're starting to get an idea of where the main Austrian effort is and kind of what the plan is, really. So, let's have a look at the actions then. Now, Abdi Pasha and Omar Pasha moved into Sofia. The Austrian forces there simply broke contact, almost as though to lure us in. Anyway, we've cleared the area around Sofia. We've lifted the siege. That's good. That's a positive development, and that will allow us to kind of begin to kind of get in supplies to Sofia, and opens up an option also for a move down to Salonika. The action that took place was at Varna, and it looks like this is the main Austrian effort. This is their main push. All of these sieges are a little bit of a sideshow. I'm not saying that they're complete diversions, but we don't want to get too distracted by them for the moment, because these forces, they're chicken feed. These aren't really big forces. They're kind of a corps or more. I mean, probably these kind of constitute commands. They're struggling to supply some of these forces, but this could be fairly readily dealt with, as could this, as could even this. And they still have forces in the rear. They still have a bit of a reserve. They've taken a lot of the reserve out to push into Varna. Let's have a look at the action in Varna. So first of all, we lose a battle, but it's not really a lot. I mean, it's defeat. But it's an attempted assault against Zagosta. We get from this the size of the Austrian force. It's a depleted force because they took only 3,000 casualties, and they lose a reserve infantry regiment. We lose 2,000 men. They get a foothold inside the fortress. The fortress is totally breached. The structure's intact at Plevna, so the Austrians are trying to make headway in Agosta. That's fine. That's just a delay, really. The fortress is good. Will let it do its job. The main Austrian effort then is in Varna. Now they don't come down altogether. They send through almost like a kind of Leading force is not they didn't move into Varna in an orderly fashion, put it that way. So they initially sent a force, well, this is just a corps. This is an infantry corps, a regular infantry corps. It engages Ahmed Pasha, supported by pretty much our entire field command, save for Hussein Avni, who's in Adrianople. So our force comprises 363,000 men. Obviously, we maul them. We inflict 7,000 casualties. We take 2,000. That corps turned back in its tracks. Then there's an additional engagement. This time a larger force. This looks to be probably 2 Austrian infantry corps, maybe plus a division or so. 54,000 men. Again, the same sort of outcome, 11,000 casualties. By now, we can see that Abdi Pasha and Omar Pasha are probably in Sofia. It's day 9, so that scans. And what we have remaining in this area is 183,000 men. That's good. So 2 victories against advanced guards, really. But then, Ahmed Pasha, who is now nominal commander of the 5th Army, he sets to break contact. So he correctly assesses here that the Austrian force now in Varna is much more than he can handle, even with the support of Riza Pasha. So he breaks contact. That's welcome, really. That's fine. We don't mind commanders exercising judgment to preserve their forces. There's going to be a big battle in Rumelia. My hunch, they're making a play for Adrianople. They're kind of doing Russia 53 or 54, whenever it was, when they're kind of, they're using forces to try and, make moves in different directions, but their main force. The hope is, really, that this offensive is kind of like Germany Spring Offensive 1918. I think this is the lion's share of their field command, actually. But this is not we shouldn't be flipping here. This is a large Austrian force. This is probably 300,000 men, maybe more. So there's probably going to be a big battle in Varna. We've got the forces to deal with that. First of all, let's set up a Pasha to defensive posture. Hold at all costs. Riza Pasha's there. His force is now complete. The 5th Army is built, and it's ready for action, and it's got everything it needs. We could even squeeze an extra cavalry division in there, which we'll do in due course. Sofia's clear. Hussein Avni, he's received replacements. His force is back up to scratch, set to a defensive posture. He's not activated. Let's move him north. 6 days. Okay. Let's get him into Rumelia. In Rumelia, after a couple of rounds of combat, our entire field army can be brought to bear for the defense of that region. My instinct is we keep these boys in Sofia for the time being. I'm really tempted to conduct a campaign with Omar Pasha, a blistering campaign to lift the siege at Salonika. But I want some kind of catharsis for this situation first, frankly. I don't want to break off the command. Certainly not with our kind of first, sort of number 1 commander ready. I want to detach him at a point where we need everything brought to bear at Rumelia. My thinking is, this is where it's going to land. They're going to make a play. They have to be doing it. Where are they going to go from there? Maybe they don't. Maybe they sort of make some sort of move into Plevna. But in the last analysis, we're going to get our forces set up so they can support each other. They're going to hold at all costs. Hussein Avni's now really coming into his own. He's the 2nd best commander we have in the field. He's 6 days away from Rumelia. I'm a little bit tempted to get Abdi Pasha or even Omar Pasha into Rumelia. The reason being is in the event of a successful defensive battle here, I'd like to be able to conduct a counter-offensive with a good commander. I mean, Abdi Pasha's quite good, but yeah, it's tempting. It's a large old force, that. So they've got a lot of field gendarmerie, they've got military police. It's gonna be I mean, if they do move for Rumelia, it's gonna be big. It's gonna be really big. Could be one of those kind of 80,000 casualty type battles. Salonika can hold. In the last analysis, my contention is Salonika can hold. It's got the supplies. It's got a big garrison. We've built Salonika up with intent. 70,000 men. They're not going to assault that with a corps. No way. Even 2 army corps. They're not going to do it. Their best hope is to sit tight, break the structure down. That's going to last for months, I think. Unless they can bring some really big force down. There's no evidence that they've got really, really big forces. up here at all. They've got some army corps, some of them low on supplies, but they're low on ammunition. There's no evidence they've got anything up here. They might even try and sort of move this force around. You know, they've done that before. They've dissipated their forces. Where they're kind of making gains, they then try and press that. So they might even try and dissipate this force across, you know, I don't know. Maybe they even move to Sofia. We hold our positions. We hold our positions in a defensive posture. That's what we're going to do. Because what if they do? What if we move everything to sort of Rumelia? They make a play for Sofia. Even with one command there, even though we get the support of everything that's in Rumelia, you've got to bear in mind that that one command is still the one holding the line. Once they sustain sufficient casualties, it doesn't matter how much support they've got, they will break contact and fall off. If we've got two field commands in theatre, it's a different game. So support is okay, but support is not the same as having forces in that district. So this is the best configuration. 3 commands in Rumelia, 2 in Sofia. That kind of ticks both boxes, really. And wherever they land, we've got substantial forces to hold the line and substantial forces to be brought in either way as support. This is where the main effort's coming, absolutely. And Adrianople's the obvious target. It's the obvious target. It's the shield of the capital. If they can take Adrianople, they can take the capital. That is a large enough force that could assault Adrianople. Not sure if it would work, but they could assault it. They're not going to get to Adrianople. No way. I don't see them getting through this. Anyway. Yeah, it's not going to be a small effort. Right, so defensive posture, hold at all costs. Defensive posture. They're all set to hold at all costs. This turn, we're going to sit on the defensive. We'll see what happens. We'll see what play they make. Yeah, my think is this is diversionary stuff a little bit here. We're going to be a little bit careful with the West. They're weak in the West. They're thin. And we can counter this. We can counter this with one command. Especially Omar Pasha. He could deal with all of this. Any of these sieges he could lift. He could lift, you know, probably 2 of them in one turn, to tell you the truth. Yeah, it's on. Their national morale is still nominal. It's at 100. We're at 111. If there's a big battle and they lose it, that will change, obviously. But anyway, that's the European theatre. That's the battles. The really exciting news with Egypt is we have unloaded the remainder of the task force. It's set. Also, the supply issues seem to be resolving themselves. Yeah, that's pretty much perfect command points. He's got some spare, and guess who's activated? Mehmed Ali Pasha. Yeah, it's time. So let's move through Suez, assault posture, and then on into Cairo. 9-day march. Let's do it. Right, in terms of other developments, they break contact at Sana, they fall back. That's their main force that defeated us before. You can see they can't get replacements now. They've got a small diversionary force on Hadramut. Let's secure the territory around Sana for the time being. He's not activated anyway, and consider our options thereafter. Let's check colonial penetration in these regions. 44. 43 in Q8. Okay. And the bad news is our attempt to kind of contest the Dutch sort of protectorate transition. It's failed again, and we have one chance. We would have played 3 attempts, and they're more than halfway there, but we only need 2 turns. And yeah, it has to come off this time, really. It's really annoying that that's happened. I'm sure it's a 50-50 chance each time. Yeah. This is our last chance, really. Otherwise, it becomes a Dutch... Look, if it becomes a Dutch protectorate, we don't instantly lose stuff, by the way. We don't lose our trade posts and our missions or anything like that just yet. And we may even have a casus belli against the Dutch because of the kind of conflicting interests. So we could consider military options for Sumatra later. Hey, a colonial war would be great. At some point, we could get to conduct our own offensive campaign somewhere. Be quite interesting. But yeah, it's a shame we didn't want it to get to that, really. We wanted to stop the transition, keep the status quo. That was the whole point of what we're looking to do. But we don't lose all of our commercial interests there in one fell swoop or anything like that. Right, let's check our other reports really quickly then. See, I'm really tempted to leave the video here to make it a manageable length, but it's such a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger for me. I want to know what's going to happen in Egypt. I want to know what's going to happen in the European theatre. Yeah, they're well into Varna. Right, let's check the economy. Should be activated. It should be fine. In terms of collection points, yeah, we have access to it now. We have should be okay. Okay. It's good. That's good exports. Really good exports. 15 fish. 157 units of goods shipped on the national market for 604 private capital. That is unreal. 80 units exported for 266, imports 40 for 100. We're pushing for steel imports. We're going to keep that at 15 for the time being. Really nice round economically. You would not think we're in the midst of a really serious war. We've got really nice state revenue. We've got a bit of a war chest, and I've been keeping an eye on officers. We've been intentionally kind of not spending much money on anything. We've been trying to kind of play a bit of a careful game. Yeah, I've been trying to play a bit of a careful game with state, because the temptation was to kind of invest in education. We're going to start doing that, I think, after the war, doing it systematically, but I think for the time being, we play a bit of a kind of careful game. We'll leave that set to 4 only, because that's what we got 100 Let's look cheekily at the possibility of another textiles factory. See, 27 units of steel, 40 manufactured goods. No, we don't have the manufactured goods this time round. It's a shame. It's a real shame. We'll hold off, I think, this term. I'm thinking we could begin to prepare the groundwork for a bit of an industrial presence in the Middle East. Probably get a textiles factory built in Baghdad. Something like that. We'll leave it for now. Let's look at what agriculture... what options there are for agricultural enterprise. So there's fishing in Crete. We actually export quite a lot of fish. It's no small thing. It really adds up. Cotton, no, we don't want that just yet. See, wool farms are tempting, but only really for the cattle at this point. Not for the cotton or the wool, because there's just no export market for that. It's saturated. You've got India, you've got like the Confederacy or the Southern, so the United States, and pure cattle farms. There just isn't the kind of grazing for it. There's nothing really. There's nothing that sort of piques our interest. Save perhaps actually for a fishing port. It's interesting that it's that expensive in Trabzon. Perhaps because of the terrain. Let's go with a fishing port in Crete. Why not? It doesn't absorb a lot of manufactured goods or steel. But it's a way of kind of reinvesting private capital into something that's in our analysis profitable. So why not? At some point, this might seem a little bit daft. We're going to look at Crete, Rhodes and Cyprus as places where we can build localized railroads. The reason being is obviously they're not connected to anything. They don't really have much of a military significance. But these are our vineyards. These are our this is our focus for wine production is the Greek islands, and that would dramatically increase and provide an industrial character to these kind of RGOs, these vineyards. And that's something we want because wine export is not something to turn your nose up at all. Where else do we? So we've got a vineyard also in Latakia. So we'll start seeing kind of industrial quantities of wine coming out of northern Syria. But for the most part, we've focused wine production in the Greek islands. And fruit access in Anatolia, we've mostly, Anatolia and the Middle East, for the most part, we've focused on just fruit plantations, as opposed to vineyards. So, yeah. Alright, let's check our exports again very quickly. So fishing port leaves us with sufficient manufactured goods, capital and everything else. One thing that we are going to look at really quickly that's good, let's check our assets balance. Sound, we're sitting on more assets, but that's fine. Yeah, that's all good. We're going to start using some of this state revenue to expand our army then. Let's begin the construction of the 6th Army. We're going to, instead of a militia, we have just built 3 conscript corps in a row. It will take time for these conscript corps to convert into something other than what they are, conscripts, militia. So we're going to build a regular infantry corps. And we're going to begin building out Smyrna. Some of our manufactured goods, offices, but that's okay. So you can see a lot of these corps they're being. I mean, this militia corps has been already turned into a regular infantry corps. I don't know. I think the HQ unit has to still a militia corps HQ. I think that's the last thing that has to change before it actually becomes formally. I'm not sure. They might require a technological leap yet, but this time we're going to go straight ahead because we've got the officers to do it, and it does make sense ultimately if you have the resources to do it. We're going to reduce exports of manufactured goods to 10 just this turn. Just allow our manufactured goods to recover a little bit. Right, that's it. Defensive in Europe, and the attack against Egypt begins then. Early April, a little bit behind schedule, but we're going to be assaulting through Suez, taking the town, and moving into Cairo. Cairo has a depot. It's probably got to be fairly substantial Egyptian forces there, but Cairo is the capital. Pretty decent commander. He's a good offensive commander, Mehmed Ali Pasha, so we should hopefully pull this off. Let's get the transport fleet back to Constantinople. And on that, let's quickly check our... so the main fleet's going to have to sit tight for some time. Same also. Let's check our combat reports for any maritime reports. I didn't see anything, and the merchants look to be in reasonably good shape. No, so no raiding this time. That's good. Right, it's too much of a cliffhanger for me to kind of resist temptation, so past turn we'll leave the video then. We're in early April and late April, at the beginning of the next turn, so we can at least kind of absorb what's happened, and I suspect there's going to be a big engagement. Maybe not, maybe the Austrians just sit tight in Varna and stare at us in Rumelia. They have generally been reluctant to prosecute attacks against areas where we have any kind of serious force concentration, so they might not. They might try and slip around, send forces around, we'll see what happens. But anyway, we've got the offensive going on to Egypt as well, so it could be an exciting month this. Yeah, I'm going to put you on pause past turn, and we'll see you in late April. Okay, welcome back then. It's late April with past turn, and Yeah, it's interesting. No big battle in Europe, basically. It always kind of evades us. They never really press positions which are kind of well defended. Instead, it seems that they had a really, really large force here, and it's not clear what they've done with all of it. I think they've broken a large part off to get a Plevna, and maybe some of it is out of view. It's concealed to the rear. I mean, here we've got a read of a really large supply force, but in terms of military forces, fairly modest, but there may be inaccurate information. So maybe they've fallen back to Constanta, and they've kept kind of exterior forces pushed out, which in turn their commander can support. Pretty smart move, really, actually. I mean, for the AI, or even for a player, it would be a pretty smart move, smart sort of play. They've also got a commander to the north of the Danube, also supporting Plevna. Now, they continue to assault Agosta with almost no results at all, but they are breaking out a fortress. Gradually, it's partially breaching out Salonika, although we have a large garrison of Salonika, so they'll be hard-pressed to take it in an assault. I'm going to have to give some thought about what to do here, but I think we are going to go on the offensive. We're going to try and mix things up. My thinking is probably we're going to conduct an offensive from Sofia, because we have 2 activated commands there. Excuse me. Through Agosta, lift the siege at Agosta, then move on to Plevna. In turn, all of those forces will be supported by 2 of the commands. Probably Riza Pasha and Ahmed Pasha. We're going to break Hussein Avenue off to head south. He's going to hold a position at Plovdiv. Well, the reason for that is he can still support Rumelia if it's attacked, but he's also then in a position when activated to conduct an attack to lift the siege at Salonika. That's my thinking anyway. I've not settled on that yet, but the general thinking is he goes to Plovdiv, Abdi Pasha and Omar set to offensive, 5 days, and then 10 to Plevna. That left the siege at Plevna. That leaves us with a configuration of 2 commands at Rumelia, 2 in Plevna to the north. So these forces can kind of support each other still. And it means that if they're attacked, they can support each other, but it also then leaves the options open for an activated force from Rumelia to then push north to Varna and start cornering these Austrian forces and kind of goading them into a really big battle. That's what we want, with substantial forces in place for us to actually pull off a victory. The temptation a little bit is, instead of sending Hussein Avni, is to send Omar Pasha in a kind of blitzkrieg type campaign. Take Skopje, then move on. 12 days to Salonika, and he would sure enough win both of those engagements, lift the siege and inflict heavy casualties on the Austrians. And that is tempting, but then again, it's subtracting our best commander. Leaves us with 1 activated command. I don't fancy sending 1 activated command on a kind of like left hook to Plevna. Anyway, got to think on that. Let's have a look at the battles that have taken place. So this is the continued attempt to assault Agosta. Every time we inflict pretty good casualties on the Austrians with the garrison there. The garrison's quite exposed at Agosta. Agosta's only a very partially formed fortress. It's always sort of deemed a defeat, which is to say that presumably the Austrians are making headway, they're kind of breaking down the fortress, and they're partially in the town. But we inflict heavy casualties for very light casualties of our own. That's interesting. Let's have a look at the offensive then that we've finally begun with our expeditionary force. Pretty decent command. You can see then anyway that it's made it to Cairo. It's a good 50-60,000 men at full strength that we've managed to kind of accumulate. Now, first engagement then was at Suez against the advanced guard of the Egyptian forces. It's a pretty easy victory. We brushed them aside, destroyed 2 elements straight off the bat, inflict just under 7,000 casualties, take 3,200 prisoners, and for only just under 900 casualties ourselves. Comfortable victory. It shows how much of a difference it makes with a properly assembled command, support structures in place, and a decent commander. We actually take an Egyptian supply wagon. We'll obviously look to move that into Cairo, I think. The following engagement then is in Cairo. The Egyptians have a fairly decent force, a fairly substantial force, presumably comprised of lots of divisions. There's no HQ units. I'm not even sure if they can build army corps. I guess they probably can't. So there's nearly 70,000 men there. They actually outnumber us slightly. We've got 60,000. It's a comfortable victory. It's not a really heavy battle. The Egyptians are quite keen to break contact. They don't fancy standing up to a serious kind of opponent. And comfortable win, we take slightly heavy casualties, 4,500. We inflict 9,600 of our own. Yeah, comfortable victory, and we take their capital city. It's not like a big European city, so we don't take loads of national morale or anything like that, but presumably their national morale will tank. We're going to hold a position in Cairo for the time being. We're going to move the Egyptian support wagons. They're 3 days, get them hooked up with Mehmed Ali's force, and yeah, he's going to hold a defensive position there, hold at all costs. There is a little bit of a temptation to conduct an offensive into Gaza and then up into the kind of delta. We're not going to do that this turn. He has just conducted a kind of good march through Suez right on into Cairo. In a fortnight he's there. These forces, you know, they need a bit of reorganisation. They also sustain some losses. The worry is they move behind and take Suez, but if they do, we can take it back without any real problems. So, not too worried about that. I do fancy breaking down the fortress at Alexandria as well, just because there might be Egyptian ships there. Also, I like the opportunity of destroying the port they have. Inflicting a little bit of damage on the Egyptians. I mean, they're not a considerable kind of economic entity by any stretch of the imagination. But if we take Alexandria, we might actually take some of their ships. You know, bit of a temptation there, but it's not essential. We could just hold our position in Cairo, frankly, and they'll start begging us for peace, and we'll consider what terms we'll offer. The longer we hold it, the better, really. That's it. That's basically the round done. I won't do anything further in this round because it's probably a long video. I'm going to leave it in late April. We'll pick up in late April. Gives me a day or two to think about what we're going to do in the European theatre, but it's time for a counter-attack. The Austrians had a chance to push Rumelia. They didn't do it. It shows that they're shy. They're shy when it comes to big pitch battles. I suppose it's in their interests, though, to kind of, you know, just sort of force down they just want to, you know, do the sieges, take the cities, and I guess they think they're going to take the Balkans piecemeal. We're going to be conducting a counter-attack this turn and lifting a couple of those sieges. And hopefully here at Plevna, this will draw in support. So Plevna, we're going to try and force the issue at Plevna with pretty much our entire field command. In fact, I might keep Hussein Avni in Romania just for one more round because we want our entire field command available to offer support for an offensive in Plevna. I'm probably going to do that through Agosta as well, just to lift the siege at Agosta. This is a paltry Austrian force here that's heavily depleted anyway. It's a kind of partially constructed force. The fact that we're seeing these and they're actually in operations, they're not being brought back, suggests, you know, it's a Kronstadt or whatever. That's quite surprising. The Austrians haven't really done that much. That suggests that they might be struggling now to replace losses. I mean, in the last analysis, you know, it doesn't matter how big the Austrian army is, you know, or was at the beginning of this war. There's just only so many battles where you lose 50, 60, 70, 80,000 men. There's only so many of those you can fight, really. And Austrian power is atrophying. And that was their big force, their doom stack. You know, they didn't fancy it. They've backed off. I guess they've spread their force out a little bit around here. That's okay, though, because they have commanders, and those commanders will come to the aid of the defense of their position in Plevna. So we're going to be fixing for a big fight in Plevna. We're now in late April. As long as we don't have any heavy rains, at the moment the weather's good. Plevna's nice flat ground, and it could be a really good place for a big battle against Austria. Against, frankly, what remains of the lion's share of their field command. And then we will look to be breaking off a force fairly quickly. Probably one of the activated commands in Rumelia that hasn't sustained heavy losses. We could even rejig the forces a bit to ensure that's the case, to then conduct a sortie south and lift the siege of Salonika in May. Gonna leave the video there. So we'll do the economic admin and stuff in the next video. So yeah, we'll pick up in late April where I'm leaving off now. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.